Little Women, Chapter 11. Aunt March settles the question. Like bees swarming after their queen, mothers and daughters hovered about Mr. March the next day. But late in the afternoon, Meg was sitting sewing alone with Joe when someone gave a tap at the parlor door. "Good afternoon, miss," said Mr. Brooke. "I came to get my umbrella. That is, to see how your father finds himself today." "I'll get him," said Joe, "and tell him that you are here." The instant she vanished from the room, Meg began to go towards the door, murmuring, "Mother will like to see you. Pray sit down. I'll call her." "Don't go. Are you afraid of me, Margaret?" And Mr. Brooke looked so hurt that Meg thought she must have done something very rude. She blushed, for he had never called her Margaret before, and she was surprised to find how natural and sweet it seemed to hear him say it. She put out her hand and said, "How can I be afraid when you have been so kind to father? I only wish I could thank you for it." "Shall I tell you how?" asked Mr. Brooke, holding her hand in both his own and looking down at Meg with so much love in his brown eyes that her heart began to flutter. "Oh no, please don't. I'd rather not," she said. "I won't trouble you. I only want to know if you care for me a little, Meg. I love you so much, dear," added Mr. Brooke tenderly. Meg hung her head and answered, "I don't know." He pressed her hand and said, "Will you try and find out? I want to know so much, for I can't go to work with any heart until I learn whether I am to have my reward in the end or not." "I'm too young," said Meg. "I'll wait. And in the meantime, you could be learning to like me. Would it be a very hard lesson, dear?" "Not if I chose to learn it, but please choose to learn, Meg." What would have happened next I cannot say, if Aunt March had not come hobbling in at this interesting minute. The old lady couldn't resist her longing to see her nephew. The family were all busy in the back part of the house, and she had made her way quietly in, hoping to surprise them. She did surprise two of them so much that Meg started as if she had seen a ghost, and Mr. Brooke vanished into the next room. "Bless me, what's all this?" cried the old lady, with a rap of her cane, as she glanced from the young gentleman to the blushing young lady. "It's father's friend. I'm so surprised to see you," stammered Meg. "That's evident," returned Aunt March, sitting down. "But what is father's friend saying to make you blush? There's mischief going on, and I insist upon knowing what it is." "We were merely talking. Mr. Brooke came for his umbrella," began Meg. "Brooke? That boy Laurie's tutor? Ah, I understand now. I know all about it." "You haven't gone and accepted him, child," cried Aunt March. "Hush! He'll hear. Shan't I call Mother?" said Meg. "Not yet. I've something to say to you, and I must free my mind at once. Tell me, do you mean to marry this man? If you do, not one penny of my money ever goes to you. Remember that, and be a sensible girl," said the old lady. "I shall marry whom I please, Aunt March, and you can leave your money to anyone you like," she said. "Highty-tighty! Is that the way you take my advice, miss? You'll be sorry for it." Aunt March stared at her a few moments, and then began in a softer tone. "Now, Meg, my dear, be sensible. I don't want you to spoil your whole life by making a mistake at the beginning. You ought to marry well and help your family. It's your duty to make a rich match." "Father and Mother don't think so. They like John, though he is poor." "So you intend to marry a man without money, position, or business, when you might be comfortable all your days by minding me and doing better. I thought you had more sense." "I couldn't do better if I waited half my life. John is good and wise. He's got heaps of talent. He's willing to work and sure to get on. He's so energetic and brave. Everyone likes and respects him, and I'm proud to think he cares for me, though I'm so poor and young and silly," said Meg. "Well, I wash my hands of the whole affair. I'm disappointed in you, and haven't spirits to see your father now. Don't expect anything from me when you are married. I'm done with you forever." And slamming the door in Meg's face, Aunt March drove off. When left alone, Meg stood a moment, undecided whether to laugh or cry. Before she could make up her mind, Mr. Brooke came into the room and embraced her, saying, "I couldn't help hearing, Meg. Thank you for defending me and proving that you do care for me." "I didn't know how much until she insulted you," began Meg. "I needn't go away, but may stay and be happy, may I, dear?" "Yes, John," she said. 15 minutes after Aunt March's departure, Joe came softly downstairs, paused an instant at the parlor door, and hearing no sound within, walked in. It was a shock to see Mr. Brooke sitting on the sofa with Meg upon his knee. Joe gave a sort of gasp. At the sound, the two turned and saw her. Meg jumped up, but Mr. Brooke laughed and said, "Sister Joe, congratulate us." Joe turned and rushed upstairs. "Oh, do somebody go down quick! John Brooke is acting dreadfully, and Meg likes it." Mr. and Mrs. March left the room, and then Joe told the news to Beth and Amy, who seemed pleased by it, rather than distressed, as Joe was. Nobody ever knew what went on in the parlor that afternoon, but a great deal of talking was done. Mr. Brooke pleaded his suit for Meg, told his plans, and persuaded her parents to accept the situation. That evening at supper, everyone looked very happy, and even Joe hadn't the heart to be jealous or dismal. "You can't say nothing pleasant ever happens now, can you, Meg?" said Amy. "The joys come close upon the sorrows this time, and I rather think the changes have begun," said Mrs. March. "In most families there comes now and then a year full of events. This has been such a one, but it ends well after all." Laurie and his grandfather came over after supper, delighted with the news of the tutor's engagement with sweet Meg. Noticing Joe's grim face, however, Laurie quietly asked her, "You don't look festive. What's the matter?" "I don't approve of the match, but I've made up my mind to bear it, and shall not say a word against it," said Joe. "You can't know how hard it is for me to give up Meg." "You don't give her up, you only go halves," said Laurie. "It can never be the same again. I've lost my dearest friend," sighed Joe. "You've got me anyhow. I'm not good for much, I know, but I'll stand by you, Joe, all the days of my life. Upon my word I will." And Laurie meant what he said. "I know you will, and I'm ever so much obliged. You are always a great comfort to me," returned Joe. "Well, now, don't be gloomy. Meg is happy. Brooke will fly round and get settled with money soon. Grandpa will help him, and it will be very jolly to see Meg in her own little house. We'll have fine times after she is gone, for I shall be through college before long, and then we'll go on some nice trip." There's no knowing what may happen in 3 years," said Joe. "That's true. Don't you wish you could take a look forward and see where we shall all be then?" "I think not, for I might see something sad, and everyone looks so happy now," said Joe, and her eyes went slowly round the room. Father and mother sat together, quietly remembering their own first days of romance some 20 years ago. Amy was drawing a picture of the couple who sat apart in a beautiful world of their own. Beth lay on her sofa, talking cheerily with her old friend Mr. Lawrence, who held her little hand. Joe lounged in her favorite low chair with a serious, quiet look, and Laurie, leaning on the back of her chair, his chin on a level with her curly head, smiled and nodded at her in the long mirror that reflected them both. Okay, back up. 1, 2, 3, right there. I think that was it. Yes, it is. Okay, so just these 3 right here for chapter 11. If you marry this man, boy, Aunt March. It was a big deal back then. You had to, when you got married, yes, you wanted to be in love with the person that you're marrying. You're going to, spend the rest of your life with this person and have a family, but you need to be stable. She didn't want to end up like the Hummels, living in a shack with a dirt floor and, children starving and freezing. And so she has to be sensible about it. And part of where families got their money was from their relatives when they passed away. So, and that still happens today, but it was important too to help the family because there wasn't retirement. Today we work, and then when we get around 60 years old or so, we retire, and we do that because we've saved money while we've been working, or we've invested it. But back then they didn't really have those kinds of things. So you pretty much had to keep working unless you had a lot of money. And so it was important for women, especially since they really could not own their own businesses. It wasn't fashionable. They needed to marry well, so they needed to be picky about who they married. And it couldn't always be just for love. But even though he did not come from money, he worked hard, and Meg liked him. And so they are now engaged. But Aunt March is not happy about it, to the point where she uses her money to control what she wants. So she said that when she dies, she's not going to leave any of her money to Meg because Meg won't listen to her about who she marries. And Meg doesn't care. So let's take this little quote and let's go to Aunt March. Where did she go? Aunt March. There she is. And we'll put this on her dialogue. So click on the text box and get your cursor right after the colon. Enter once on the keyboard. Drop the font down to 10. And paste. Okay. And then Meg replies, not even bothered by it at all, "I shall marry who I please." She's basically saying, you are not the boss of me and I don't have to listen to you. Which, of course, Aunt March did not like at all. Whew. Okay, so let's move Meg's name over to the corner here. And click on the text box, and then grab this little square and stretch it up. Let's make some more room. There we go. So when we paste that in, look at the last thing we have for Meg. Meg's castle. Remember her dream? I should like a lovely house full of all sort of luxurious things. And now look how she's changed. I shall marry who I please, and you can leave your money to whoever you like. Oh, so this really is not going along with her castle, with her dream or her wish. But she's grown up a little bit and doesn't care about the money as much as she used to. Interesting change in character for Meg. So she's changing as she's growing up. Now, Meg, dear, be sensible. You ought to marry well and help your family. So that means like to help her parents too. So if they're not able to retire or they're not able to keep working, the children would be responsible to help take care of the parents. And many people still do that today. That's not uncommon, but not as much as it used to be back then. So we'll go back to Aunt March. And we'll add this to her dialogue. Click on the text box and then get the cursor right there. Enter once. Trying to convince Meg to be sensible and marry somebody that has some money and a good job. I think that's all we had. Yep, but she doesn't listen. And she is now engaged, even though they won't get married for a while, for a few years. But they are betrothed to one another. So that's like their promise to each other.